Hello. So, some of you wanted me to do a video on the speaking part of TOEFL. So, I'm going to go ahead and switch over and just give you a brief summary. And we're going to talk about more of opinion type of stuff today, but I am going to go over a general overview of the speaking part of TOEFL first. It is so important that you spend a lot of preparation for the TOEFL. I get a lot of messages asking me, hey, can you guarantee me a score of this? I take my test in 3 weeks. First of all, I can't guarantee any score because I am not you, first of all. It really depends on how you learn, what are your study habits, how you are taking an exam, because some of us are not the best test takers. So, for example, I'm not the best test taker. I'm very smart, in my opinion, but test taking has not always been my thing. So, I can't guarantee what score you'll get. But what I can say is the TOEFL should never be rushed. Some of you just want to get into it, just like learning language. I want to skip all of these steps and I want to start speaking fluently, but it doesn't happen that way. You have to go step by step and take time. I'm going to give you a quick little example. If you bake a cake and you are in such a hurry, you don't want to put all of the ingredients in. So you don't put flour in because you're in a hurry. You want to get this cake done. Guess what? Your cake is not going to come out as good as it would have if you had just added the flour. It'll actually be terrible. So my point is, don't skip any set steps and take time to prepare. It will all work out at the end. And also and I'm not just talking about TOEFL, those that actually take learning English or any language step by step and don't spend hours trying to cram it in their brain are the ones that will remember, retain it a lot longer, understand it, and will do better with conversation, better test scores on not just TOEFL, but IELTS. So there's something to be said about a little bit at a time and a lot of preparation. It works out better for you. But on that note, let's get started. All right, so we've got 4 different areas in the speaking section of the TOEFL. We'll call them tasks. So we have reading, listening, and speaking. And we also have an independent speaking. And so that is going to test your ability to speak clearly, coherently. Remember, that was one of our TOEFL vocabulary words, and fluently. So I'm going to go off on a little bit of a soapbox here. I know everybody's in a rush to get this TOEFL done and we want to do this overnight. Take your time. I know some of you don't agree with me about starting with vocabulary words, but you need to start learning vocabulary words. I know you want to get into the other stuff. However, those vocabulary words will drive other sections of the exam, like speaking, reading, writing. So make sure you are learning those words and learning how to use them, because so often when people learn a word, they're memorizing it, but they're not practicing on how to use it in conversation or in writing. So then the word is not used correctly. So just keep that in mind. All right. When you are taking the speaking test, especially the opinion, you want to be clear. You want to make sense. You want to give your opinion and the reason why you think that. You don't want to just say, well, I disagree with the question. Okay, why? So a lot of the opinion part of the speaking, you're going to ask yourself why. So when you have that time to kind of think about how you're going to answer, first of all, you want to think, do I agree, yes or no? And then you want to ask yourself why. There's always a why. Why do I agree with this? Why do I not agree with this? Okay. And you give your example, but you want to be quick and to the point. Now, I don't want you to do this yet. If you are new to studying for the speaking part of the TOEFL or any part of the TOEFL, please do not use a timer, because you're going to be so stressed out about the time that it's going to mess up your studying. Practice first taking the TOEFL, studying your vocabulary words, speaking aloud, answering the questions. Get familiar with the structure of the test. The closer you get towards your official exam date, then you're going to have those vocabulary words down. You're going to have reading, writing, everything down to a T, which means you're going to know it. You're going to know that structure of the test. That's when you're going to start practicing with the timer. If you're learning how to answer a question or a new vocabulary word and you throw that timer in there, it's going to mess up your rhythm. So don't do it. But I put that in there so you understand that this is a timed test. And if you do not study for the timed part, it will affect your score. So many people often will study, will do great on the practice tests, but when they take the TOEFL, they bomb it. Their score is bad because they never practice the timed part. Okay, so don't worry about that now. Here's another thing. So many of you want to be so perfect with your grammar. And you have to keep in mind, we don't speak how we write. So our writing is going to be different than how we speak. Of course, you want to have grammar. You don't want to say he don't like pizza because that's wrong. It would be he doesn't like pizza. Stop aiming for perfection and really focus on fluency. Nobody is a perfect speaker, including Native Americans. If you don't believe me, come to the United States, go sit on a park bench, go to the mall, and listen to people. You will be amazed how bad our grammar is over here. You really want to emphasize fluency. And the reason why this is so important is so often people, they want to perfect their grammar. They want to sound like an encyclopedia, but they didn't work on their pronunciation. So then they're not clear. They mispronounce words. Nobody can understand them. It becomes a hot mess. If you are one of those people that has a very strong accent, practice your letter sounds like R, roar like a tiger. Many times Eastern Europeans, when they say a word with W, it ends up as the V sound. So practice that wah, 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 W sound. Those are tips that can help you with better fluency. And it does take time. So you want to make sure you do a lot of practicing on that to help with your fluency. But fluency, it's so important. So make sure you do not forget about that. And then, of course, you want to listen to sample answers. You don't want to copy because you want to make the answers your own, but it gives you an idea of how to get to the point. So we're going to take a look at some of sample answers, and we're going to see how, wow, you can answer something and get to the point. And the reason why you want to get to the point is it's a timed test. And just so you know, it's something I have to do because you'll ask me a question, I'll tell you the answer, but then I'll start going off on a side note. Oh, that reminds me of the time, blah, blah, blah. And before you know it, it's taken me 15 to 20 minutes to answer your question. You don't have that kind of time with the TOEFL. So you want to get to the point. So let's take a look at some examples. These are all going to be opinion. Of course, there are different types of questions on the TOEFL. Today, we're just talking about opinion-based. So let's look at the first one. Do you prefer studying alone or studying with a group? First of all, you're going to think to yourself, what do I like? Alone or studying with a group? Now, if you're like me, sometimes I can't pick. Sometimes I want to say, well, I prefer both. It depends on the situation. That's okay. It may not be black and white for you, is what I'm trying to say. And then you want to explain your choice with reasons and examples. So here's the sample answer. I prefer studying alone because it helps me focus better without distractions. Okay, there's your opinion. This is what you like to do. And there's your reason. Now let's go into the example. When I'm alone, I can set my own pace and revisit materials I find difficult. For example, when I studied for my biology test, I used flashcards and could spend more time on the chapters I struggled with. Notice how it gave an opinion and it got right to why and an example, but it wasn't like 15 or 20 minutes long. So you really want to narrow that down. Now, if you're like me, I could say something like, it depends on the situation and the subject. So, for example, I prefer studying alone because it helps me focus better without distractions. When I'm alone, I can set my own pace. However, if it's a subject like math, because I do need extra help, I do prefer to study with a group. So, see how I kind of change that? I'm not saying I agree with just alone or just with the group. I've made it my own. All right, let's go to the next one. Do you prefer living in a big city or a small town? First of all, think to yourself, what do you like? And then you want to explain why. Here's the sample answer. I prefer living in a small town because it's quieter and less crowded. I enjoy the sense of community where everyone knows each other. For instance, in my hometown, we have festivals where neighbors gather and help one another, creating a very warm atmosphere. Gave my opinion, explained why, gave an example. Bam. Quick. All right, let's go to the next one. Should students have part-time jobs while studying? Think about it. And then give your why and an example. Here's our sample answer. Yes, students should have part-time jobs. It helps them develop time management skills and gain work experience. Okay, that's your answer and your why. Now let's talk about an example. When I worked at a coffee shop during college, I learned how to balance work and study, and it also helped me become more responsible. Quick and to the point. Okay, let's go over our last one. Do you think it's better to study one subject deeply or learn about many different subjects? I believe it's better to learn about many different subjects. Why? It makes the person more well-rounded and helps in understanding how different fields are connected. Okay, now we need an example. Well, for example, knowing a bit about psychology helped me improve my communication skills in group projects. So, how can you practice this? This is a great question that many of you have asked. So, one of the ways I recommend, and it's something I have to work on myself, when you are talking with friends or family, start having conversations where you're getting to the point. That's an issue with me because I'm very long winded. But if you can start practicing, like for example, you come home, your wife or your husband, boyfriend, girlfriend, mom or dad, or whoever asks you, how was your day? Get to the point. Don't, and then. When you start practicing how to answer questions and get to the point, it will help you in the long run. And then also you can go to ChatGPT, ask for some sample questions, go to Google, ask for some sample questions, go to your library, get a TOEFL book, look at sample questions. And what this does is this gets you familiar with the different types of questions that are out there. So the next video that I'm going to do will talk about transition. And what is transition? So go look at here where it says, for example, that's a transition. I'm going to go back. We are looking for transitions. I want a good one. That's, for instance, is another one. That's when you are talking about something, but you are transitioning into something else. So for instance, this is my transition into my example. So the next video, and I know I'm not being clear right now, but there is a reason for my madness. This is an overview of opinion-based and just me rambling on about some important things to remember about speaking. When you speak, get to the point, but you're also going to need transition sentences. So you're going to do, for example, for instance, when you want to conclude something, including your writing, you want to say lastly, so somebody knows you're wrapping it up. But don't worry about that now. Don't stress. Just start to get familiar with what I've said today. And the next video, we're going to go over transition words, phrases, and that will not only help with your speaking, but with your writing as well. So see in this video and these sample things we went over, if you can find some other transitions in there, that'll kind of help you start to learn. And this, of course, will help with your writing as well. As always, message me with any questions or extra help or whatever you need. These videos that I do are coming from your ideas. Otherwise, I'm not that creative. So keep them coming. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.